In 1968, developmental psychologist Erik Erikson described adolescence as, quote, a critical period of identity formation in which individuals overcome uncertainty, become more self-aware of their strengths and weaknesses, and become more confident in their own unique qualities, end quote. However, can we identify the drivers in this journey of self-identity? A sense of belonging, a sense of tribe, the idea of a safe ideological space for like-minded individuals to occupy. These are all common themes acknowledged in the majority of ethnological studies. Without doubt, the need for young people to express their identity is historical, but how does this manifest itself within this digital generation? One of my most vivid memories of Manchester in the 1970s and 80s was of the very visible, very diverse youth culture clustered around the city centre. Groups of punks, skinheads, heavy rockers, and latterly, new romantics, goths, and casuals would meet in their regular haunts every weekend, each group occupying their own adopted space. These strange-looking, noisy, and often intimidating adolescents brought energy, colour, and a sense of intrigue to the city centre. From the late 1940s and through the 1950s, youth culture was centred around informally structured gangs of almost exclusively working-class young men. Mike Brake, in his book Comparative Youth Culture, suggests that in post-war Britain, this was, quote, a collective delinquent solution in response to the newly emerging teenage culture, end quote, and goes on to comment that, quote, working-class youth subcultures attempted to infuse into the bleak world of excitement and colour during the short respite between school and settling down into marriage and adulthood, end quote. The visual identity of emerging youth culture in the 1950s was defined by the early musical influences of the jazz, soul, and rock and roll performers from the USA. Young people had a newly found sense of optimism set against the austere backdrop of post-war Britain. There was a desire for something different, an opportunity for young people to create a new collective identity. Barry Sugarman in 1967 suggested, quote, it is no accident that the heroes of youth culture, pop singers, songwriters, clothes designers, and others have mostly achieved their position without long years of study, work, or sacrifice. Youth culture is the new opium of the teenage masses, end quote. Sugarman was observing a newly emerging cult of celebrity and recognised the influence this could have on youth identity. The 1960s and early 70s heralded a new era of musical experimentation and artistic freedom in a world of new media and communication. TV, radio, and cinema provided the platform for an explosion of youth subculture. Social, economic, and political factors still underpin the motivation for teenage behaviour and identity, but it is generally recognised that musical genres, style, and attitude were the driving force in this era of artistic and cultural experimentation. The mid to late 1970s and 1980s saw the emergence of some of Britain's most recognisable youth cultures, including punk, goth, heavy metal, new romantics, and ska. These new musical genres, in the main, were born out of a desire to create and justify dissent in a time of political instability, high unemployment, financial uncertainty, and mainstream musical stagnation. There was a profound dissatisfaction with the mainstream pop music at this time, with young people desperate to establish their own unique identity and attitude. Daniel Lawhy, in his book Music and Culture, states, quote, and whilst not every young person is a music follower, I will argue that music retains a social and cultural force of identification and presentation in nearly all young people's lives, whether they like it or not. End quote. It was still apparent that social class, parental dysfunction, an anti-school culture, and a lack of aspiration were all underlying influences, but musical rebellion and radical fashion seemed to define the era. This grouping, flocking, gathering of visibly identifiable youth on the streets is a rare sight nowadays. So we may ask, how are young people creating their own identities today? What influences are at play in this new world of digital media?
I think social media is the biggest one, isn't it? Because it's just like everyone lives on their phone now, and everyone lives in a million different worlds at once with it, because it's like you have access to so many more different types of people than you did before. Because with like the generation before ours, it was more kind of your own little world, what you saw around you, and it was very separate, like genres of people, wasn't it? Whereas with us, it's kind of, everyone's a bit of everything. And
all that I sort of follow on social media these days is these music artists, these fashion designers that really inspire me, so that's sort of where I go off.
Yeah, because I've met so many people I've spoken to online, and they're like personalityless, or they're just very shy in person. You see them on the internet, and they're just like these crazy, like, you know, that you think like they're dead active and they're getting about doing all these like mad things, and they're just not. Or they might be, but they're not the same person when you sit down and speak to them.
Social media is the reason why I buy half the clothes I buy, because I see them on somebody that looks better than me and I'm like, oh, they look nice, I'm going to buy it, and then I become disappointed that I don't look like them.
Professor Geet Stout in 2008 argues that, quote, digital media is a personal tool for the coordination of everyday life, for updating oneself on social relations, and for the collective sharing of experiences, end quote. Mass communication using digital technologies, referred to as new media, has allowed young people in particular to explore and synthesize a wide spectrum of social, political and cultural ideologies. But does this ultimately influence and define visual identity? It can be argued that in a pre-digital media world, youth culture was clearly defined and easily subdivided into recognisable fan groups or scenes. Youth identity today, particularly style and fashion, seems to be interchangeable and transferable, with young people creating visual identities without committing to a specific music style or scene. Many argue that there are few exciting new musical movements, fashions and attitudes emerging today, and so young people choose to cherry-pick from already established fashion, hair and makeup styles. This ironically mimics many of the fashion styles of their parents' youth, a concept likely to have horrified young people of past generations, but ultimately seems to be celebrated today as an identity which suggests confidence and open-mindedness.
It's like no one really dresses in like one style anymore. Some people do just because that's what they feel comfortable in, but I know I don't. Like, wear neon yellow today and tomorrow I'll probably just wear like normal clothes or like all black or something.
I mean, like, I do the same makeup every day. So I guess on a makeup level then, yeah, I'm the same person, but my clothes change, and so strangers who see me, they get a different opinion of me visually than what somebody who might know me.
Much will change in the sense of like my dress sense or anything. I think I'll always have this kind of like high fashion mixed with guy off the council estate look, so yeah.
I don't think so. I feel like everybody listens to a mixture of everything rather than like emo people listen to that music and people who like rock listen to rock music. I listen to everything. I feel like people have like a more broader spectrum of the music that they like now compared to before.
I think like when you were like probably like our age, you wouldn't really listen to what your parents listened to, would you? Whereas now we've grown up with what our parents listen to, and most of it we listen to anyway.
So a lot of the stuff you were listening to,
we're listening to now.
Combined with
so you don't really like have one set thing you listen to. Like, I listen to like really heavy metal screaming, and on the other hand, I'm listening to the Spice Girls. Like, within like the same like 10 minutes. Like, there's no.
Yeah, it's like I really love Oasis, and it's like they don't even make music anymore.
No, yeah.
They don't do gigs anymore.
I think now, I don't know whether it's my age or whether it's the way that things are moving again. One day I'll come in dressed really dark and heavier makeup and feel like that because I do enjoy that music, and the next I'll be dressed differently but I'll still be listening to that music. I feel like people's aesthetics kind of cross a lot more, like they vary more.
The digital phenomenon of gaming is often accused of creating a generation of young people who have little or no compulsion to leave their own bedrooms and are happy to submerge themselves in the false realities of imagined worlds. But they will argue that they belong to a global community with a shared common identity. Along with other non-music based scenes such as Marvel, DC, sci-fi, anime, Lolita and horror, their identities are often played out through cosplay at the burgeoning number of Comic Cons up and down the country. Fans will celebrate their devotion by dressing up, identifying with their favourite characters and signalling group identity. Iker et al. In 1991 suggests that, quote, In the cosplay process, the player is expressing a new dimension of self through costume, while simultaneously addressing and sharing with the group identities of others. In this way, cosplayers appear to be expressing their secret selves in public." End quote.
I've been following it for about 8 years, but I didn't know that it was something that was going on in England for a long time, so I've been dressing this way for 5 years now, after seeing at a comic book convention a few girls dress that way, and I was like, oh, well, it is something that goes on in England rather than just in Japan. I think people mostly just care about their Instagram persona rather than their real life. So it's like they'll curate this incredible Instagram that shows them to be this wonderful person, but the reality is not so. It's like most girls my age just want to be a Kardashian now, which is unfortunate.
These fleeting visual displays can be interpreted as a form of escape from the mundane pressures of everyday life, or perhaps an opportunity to gather together with others who share a similar identity. It seems that youth subculture and the idea of tribe, which we recognise from the pre-digital era, is still important today, even if these identities are not lived out on a daily basis.
It's not as drastic as it was, really. It's like people used to like shave their heads or like wear all black or paint their nails, or but like no one really goes to that extent anymore. So it's, I don't know.
I think people are rebelling in a sense of destructive and more in a way of trying to rebuild things and make things a nicer place rather than going around smashing things and being angry. I think people are trying to make the world a better place.
Whereas in previous generations, trends and cultures were so clearly defined, this generation has been called identityless, ambiguous, homogenised by technology. With access to different cultures, information and traditions, youth have the opportunity to copy and paste a range of identity influences. They still conform to identity, it's just loosely formed, more complex and self-curated. Whether it's a positive or a negative self-made identity, both are exploited and validated on social media. This fluidity of identity has provided youth with new pathways when it comes to rebellion. Rebellion as we knew it, breaking social norms to show defiance, does not seem to be effective enough for this generation. They would much rather spend their energy creating change on matters impacting the world today. The environment, social justice, equality, and gender are among the most significant and meaningful issues for this generation. This is a generation with a collective global identity, capable of bringing about real and meaningful change.